From humble beginnings as periodicals for intellectuals, magazines have moved with the times, conveying and creating norms, reinforcing and breaking rules. The impact of magazines on literacy and culture has been tremendous, but when and how did they emerge? This documentary will take a look at magazines before the digital revolution. We'll uncover the origins and follow the evolution of these publications as a medium of communication, a vehicle of cultural curation, an influencer of public perceptions, and ultimately as a blueprint for the modern media of today. Magazines have a complex history, shaped by the cultures and times in which they developed. As such, this documentary can in no way cover the entire history of magazines. Instead, it will focus on the key developments in magazine publishing and design throughout the Western world that shaped us historically and culturally. It was once the printing press became established in Europe that irregular publications in the form of pamphlets and brochures paved the way for the birth of the magazine. The first magazine published in Germany during the 17th century was a literary journal by Johann Rist. Its title, translated in English, was Edifying Monthly Discussions. Rist's magazine stimulated others to begin publishing. Germany, France, and the Netherlands led the way, with similar periodicals quickly emerging, all intended for an intellectual audience. Progression to a publication with a greater variety of themes and authors appeared in the year 1672. Le Murque Galant, created by French author Jean Deneau de Viz, was considered the first periodical of amusement, combining information on court events, theatre, fashion, and literature in the form of news, stories, and poetry. The concept of combining news and entertainment gained great popularity and began to be copied throughout Europe. The turn of the 18th century saw more audience diversity for periodicals, and with an increase in literacy among women, the time had come for the first women's magazine. Launched in London in the year 1693, the Lady's Mercury was a weekly publication that promised to respond, and I quote, to all the nice and curious questions concerning love, marriage, behaviour, dress, and humour of the female sex, whether virgins, wives, or widows. Publications were called periodicals until the name magazine appeared in 1731 with the emergence of the Gentleman's Magazine by the English printer Edward Cave. Magazine, which comes from the Arabic word makzin or makzan, means storehouse. Fittingly, the Gentleman's Magazine was originally a monthly collection of essays and articles gathered from other sources. The first American magazines debuted in 1741, when Andrew Bradford's American Magazine and Benjamin Franklin's General Magazine began publication in Philadelphia just 3 days apart. Like many magazines of the time, these enterprises were rather short-lived. Magazines as a concept could be considered a great success, but the proliferation of magazines was challenged by too few readers with leisure time to read, high cost of publishing, and expensive distribution systems. Until the end of the 1880s, magazines relied solely on subscription revenues or the wealth of their publishers to cover expenses. This began to change during the beginning of the 19th century when efforts were made to reduce the price of magazines and take aim at a wider audience. It was during this time that the first ads appeared. Advertising directly resulted in an increase in the use of illustrations, and publishers began to realize that magazines could be a vehicle to showcase merchandise, not just ideas. In the United States, magazine publishing boomed as part of the general expansion after the Civil War. It was also helped along by some favorable postal rates for periodicals. This resulted in the emergence of some soon-to-be well-known publications, such as the Saturday Evening Post, Harper's, Scribner's, and Cosmopolitan. As mass circulation magazines grew, there began a noticeable shift in the content publishers were creating. At first, these magazines were focused on improvement, enlightenment, and family entertainment. Then, near the end of the 19th century, the trend leaned more towards light entertainment and miscellaneous information. This shift in content resulted in magazines that presented news through images. Highly illustrated publications became popular in France and Germany. And in Britain, penny magazines emerged to feed the imaginations of the masses with serialized short fiction from the likes of Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle. The late 19th century saw the invention of photography, the rotary press, and the development of the half-tone block. These inventions marked a turning point for the magazine to become one of the world's leading media forms. With an increase in technological advances came an increase in leisure time, particularly in North America. And as a consequence, the popularity of magazines flourished. By the turn of the 20th century, the physical appearance of magazines had been transformed. The use of the half-tone block in printing resulted in a continuous tone image which dramatically enhanced the quality of pictures, line drawings, and photographs. This process, which quickly became widely adopted, played an important role in mediating the concept of the magazine as a designed object, not just a collection of text. Four-color printing contributed further to this change. Newspapers and books were the main competitors at the time, but now magazines were beginning to look rather different, evolving beyond the traditional definition of a publication. Magazines were becoming art forms. Enter publishing icons William Randolph Hearst, Henry Luce, and Joseph Pulitzer, who appeared on the scene to exploit these cultural and technological changes. Between them, they gave life to some of our most well-known magazines. Time, a masthead which remains a household name today, revolutionized magazine publishing and journalism. With its presentation of world news in tightly packed inverted sentences, systematic presentation, and signature red border, Time, and what came to be known as the Time style, greatly influenced post-war news magazines. It is during this era that the term yellow journalism arises, an exaggerated, sensationalist approach to news reporting that was first employed by Hearst and Pulitzer during the Spanish-American War of 1898. This style of news reporting roused public support and influenced policy decisions, and can still be found today in full representation in the stacks near the grocery store checkout counters. On the opposite end of the ethical spectrum, bound by a strict code of honesty and impartiality, photojournalism emerged as a new form of journalism and media. Made possible by the invention of the compact camera, photojournalism pioneered the photo essay. Life, the most influential photojournalism magazine of the time, featured a full 50 pages of photographs and text condensed into captions. The format became an instant classic. By the 1930s, market research had become the norm for periodicals, as publishers and advertisers worked to better understand what readers wanted from their publications. As a result, a range of less mainstream publications emerged, including pulp fiction, entertainment magazines, fan and teen magazines, as well as digests. Post-World War II brought with it the golden age of magazines. Madison Avenue in New York of the 50s was a hub of the creative revolution, giving birth to a new generation of designers and art directors who broke new ground in magazine design. This was a time of Mad Men and the creation of magazines for men filled with visual eye candy such as Esquire and Playboy. Women became a focus for advertisers and publishers too, as the American housewife was regarded as the primary consumer in the 1950s. The Women's Home Companion, the most popular women's magazine of the 1950s, reinforced traditional gender roles and promoted the ideals of domesticity. That began to change, however, in 1945, when the French magazine Elle became instrumental in changing the way women thought, spoke, and saw themselves. Its publisher, Hélène Gordon-Lazareff, was a bold and influential personality who used Elle to infuse the domestic space with images of glamour presented alongside images of women as voters and professionals. However, despite these successes, the magazine industry was losing dominance, bleeding readership and precious advertising revenue to another media form that was quickly gaining in popularity. TV emerged as a mass medium in the late 1950s, early 60s, and in its first decade began to displace magazines along with other mass media. Television offered national advertisers seeking a mass market a far more efficient medium by which to reach their audience. And to survive, magazines had to rethink their position. Instead of mass entertainment magazines, publishers began focusing on special interests and content that was appealing to a younger audience. A variety of specialized magazines appeared, and traditional publications revamped to stay with the times, such as Cosmopolitan. First published as a family magazine in the 1880s, Cosmo refocused in the 60s to become a magazine for the modern single career woman. The 1980s saw the introduction of desktop publishing software and the digitization of magazine production. And this is where our story stops for now. However, if we reflect on the journey of the magazine until this point, we see a medium that has dramatically changed what and how we read. Magazines have brought to life new forms of journalism and design. They have conveyed art and become art. And just as art reflects life, revealed in the pages of these publications across the ages, in the layout, typography, style, and editorial choices, is a reflection of who we are.